Anyway, moving on, I wanted to talk a little bit about this quote that I gave you at the beginning from Albert Einstein and how it applies to being a good teacher. And if you're a good teacher, then you're also a good consultant or a good salesperson, or you're good at marketing. And also about how it applies to modern propaganda as it results to people that purport to be experts on television. And the difference between explaining something simply versus dumbing it down. Okay? So, again, the quote by Einstein was, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. And I want you to think about the people that they bring on TV to be experts about anything they're trying to convince you of. And remember, they always have an agenda when they bring an expert. They already know what side, like when they ask, well, what do you think, Dr. Dickhead? They already know that Dr. Dickhead's going to come down on side A of the issue because that's the agenda they have. Right? They've already vetted that. I've been on major media. I'm telling you, they call you up and they know every answer. They ask you 100 questions, and of that 100 questions, when you get actually interviewed, that interviewer is going to ask you 2 or 3 of them. But they know how you're going to answer them in advance. They're vetted that way on these big shows. So that doctor will bloviate and use a bunch of words and say something about National Institutes of Health and the World Health Organization and all the experts and all the studies and sound like he's really important and really smart, but it actually won't have anything to do with explaining the answer. And then they'll give you an answer that can be understood by a kindergartner that is basically, you should do this. And they create this illusion that the two things they just spat out were connected because either they don't understand it well enough, or they know if you understood it, you wouldn't believe them. You take your pick. And so understanding something simply is not dumbing it down. It is explaining in a way that the person you're speaking to, you bring them up to your level, but remain simplified enough in your explanation that they can comprehend it when it is information they have not been previously exposed to. So we might use some smaller words. We won't use industry jargon. Or if the industry jargon is indeed important to the explanation, we'll explain the meaning of the jargon. And another thing it makes me think of is the way that script writers try to baffle people with bullshit in TV shows. We made the mistake of watching the old series 24 on Hulu recently, my wife and I, and listening to the baffling bullshit that comes out with the information technology stuff. You know, like, well, tell them the multiplex. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? I mean, or medical shows. Right? Where they just they say, we'll start a central line. That's actually a massively invasive procedure that you don't just randomly do to every single person that comes into an ER. But if you didn't know that, when you heard these impressive terminologies, you'd be like, wow, that's really realistic. No, it's not. And there's so many people in the world that are presenters that instead of being teachers, they're talkers. Now, obviously, all of us that are presenters, we have to talk or you're not going to hear anything, and we're not going to make a lot of sense. I guess we could be painters or something and instruct that way. But if we're going to teach orally, then we have to talk. But you can just talk or you can actually teach. And the reality is, the reason you should strive to become a master at teaching the things that you love is you'll be better at them. There are people, and you can tell when you listen to them and they teach a thing that they've taught for 10 years, like in a classroom environment or something. They're no better at it than the day they taught it the first time because they're not actually teaching it. They're narrating. They're talking. And they're either dumbing it down to get the person that they're teaching, air quotes, to be able to fumble through it well enough to get out the other end through a test. Right? Or they're just narrating it and relying on that person to learn for themselves. You might as well just, and I think back to, I had some good teachers in high school, but most of them, they might as well have just recorded what they had to say one time every day in class and then played it, because they'd have to teach 3 or 4 classes, just play it each day, and they could have done that for 10 years. One of my friends in high school, my junior year, a guy named Mark, we did real good on all of our tests in this one teacher's English class. because his sister had that teacher for that class 7 years ago, and literally nothing had changed. And that teacher didn't explain it simply, he just simply explained it. What explaining something simply means is truly understanding the material, truly understanding the individual or group you're explaining it to, and building a bridge between their level of knowledge and a new level of knowledge. This is difficult to do if you don't yourself understand the material rather than simply being able to regurgitate it with jargon. It's also difficult to do until you learn to understand the true principles of teaching. And it's also, to be fair to teachers, presenters, etc., it is very difficult to do if the audience does not wish to learn. And there's two distinct skills in presenting, teaching, consulting. It's all the same, but there's two distinct skills. One is the conveyance of the knowledge, and two is to be engaging enough to get the student who's not quite there with desire to find the desire within themselves, to motivate the student to wish to learn. And I recently listened to a talk show host say, and it was about homeschool, and of course he was against it, and he had a bald head and a big mustache. They know who he was. But I believe teaching is a science. And I'm thinking, well, I've seen some teachers that couldn't practice science if it was handed to them in a freaking cup with a freaking bottle of vodka. Okay? Or maybe they'd be better at it that way. I don't know. Teaching is not a science. Science is an error-detecting process. That's what science is. In spite of everything... See, and that's an example of explaining something simply. That's an example. Science is this really multidisciplinary... No, science is an error-detecting process. That's what it does. We take the scientific method, we detect errors, we correct for them, and we keep doing it till we can get something to work the way we that expected it would, or the way that explains what's going on. And then if that result can be replicated by others, then it is verified as being most likely the case. It takes a lot of verification. It's like a blockchain. You know, one confirmation, it's probably there, but we wait for 3. And in that confirmation process, can your results be replicated by others? If they cannot be, we've detected an error in the process. Either the way you've documented it is wrong, or what you think you did is wrong, or the result you got was an aberration and you missed something, and it can, because if it happened once, it can happen again, but you missed something in your process, so you didn't document it right. Science is an error detecting process. Teaching is not an error detecting process. Teaching is the conveyance of knowledge, and if it's good teaching, the conveyance of knowledge to where the student can then teach what they were taught. See, that's again making it simple to understand without dumbing it down. You should always, as a teacher, as a presenter, as a consultant, as a storyteller, bring people up. And if you think this doesn't apply to you, because I don't know, you're a grandpa and all you do is sit around and tell children stories like the ant and the grasshopper, that's exactly what it applies to. We tell children stories like the ant and the grasshopper to bring them up a layer, up a level. It's not an error detecting process. It's a knowledge conveyance process. It's a memory enhancement process. And it's one of the noblest pursuits of mankind. It's probably the most, they say that prostitution is the world's oldest profession. I don't believe that is the case. I believe the world's oldest profession is teaching others. It is a naturally innate human instinct to teach others, because this is the survival podcast. And the reason we're doing this topic today, it's a survival topic. If you end up in a situation where you have to rely on others, and those others don't know all the things that are necessary to ensure the survival of the group, the only way to get them there is to teach them, to organize, to realize there may be things you don't know, and to get cross-training, which is cross-teaching. The primates of the world teach, they not? I'm watching my dog Charlie teach my pup Belle. I teach her the limitations, and he teaches her what to do within those limitations. We're not allowed to do these things. We're not supposed to do these things. We don't just bark at people that are let in, but we damn sure bark at the guy on the other side of the gate. The dog is teaching. Teaching is an innate, instinctual thing that we have been convinced by a power elite that realizes its power. That only special people can do, because they don't want you to have the power. Here's an example of the power in of itself in teaching. A real world example that I did with my granddaughter. My granddaughter was not hip on learning to read. She didn't want to. Why? Don't really know. Doesn't really matter. Nothing I can do about the why not. Only thing I can do is help find the why, because what can we not make a child do? Learn a thing they do not wish to learn. Well, if a 5-year-old girl doesn't want to learn something, she's not going to. So Grandpa sat down with her and explained to her that reading was a superpower. This is a complex thing explained in a simple way without talking down to somebody. This is the truth. Reading is a superpower, Tegan. If you know how to read, there will never be a thing that you want to know that you cannot know. Nobody will be able to prevent you from knowing it. No one. And if you want to travel somewhere that you can't go to because you don't have the money or the time, and somebody wrote about it, you can read about it and you can go there in your head and no one can ever stop you, ever. Reading's a superpower, Tegan. Your brother Braylon has it. Your daddy has it. Your mom has it. Your grandma has it. Your grandpa has it. Now, do you want that superpower too? She got up off the ground. She was having a fit about it. Ran out to her grandma and said, Grandma, I want to learn how to read. Why? Because she saw the motivation as to what it would do for her. Why it would benefit her. Not because I said so. But it was the explanation of something extremely complex at the level a 5-year-old would understand. Why? Because I understand it myself. Think about what you understand at that level yourself. Every person in this world that understands anything valuable, anything positive, needs to be teaching. Every Jedi needs a Padawan. Go find yours. With that, it's been Jack Spirko with another episode of the Survival Podcast.